and this video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous 12 hours. We have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about Trump's push for peace. According to the Wall Street Journal, Trump's push for peace in Ukraine has already collapsed. Trump's plan for a Putin-Zelensky summit had foundered. His proposal for peacekeeping forces was immediately rejected by the Kremlin. Yesterday, Trump urged Ukraine to attack Russia, abandoning his own peace deal. The Treasury Department has raised the prices for U.S. weapons to fund air cover for Europe, not direct aid to Ukraine. Trump has imposed tariffs on India for purchasing Russian oil. No U.S. soldier will serve in Ukraine. They will only assist European forces. So these days, we've seen a lot of updates, a lot of statements that tell us one important thing, that most likely nobody is going to stop this war. Another important detail is coming from the United States of America. U.S. Secretary of State Rubio and Zelensky's office chief Yermak discussed security guarantees for Ukraine at advisory meeting. The parties plan to finalize the guarantee model by the end of the next week. This is very important, and it is very important to understand the details of this model. The details of the security guarantees are currently being worked out by two subgroups, political and legal and purely military. Military guarantees in particular consist of the supply of weapons, financial support for the defense forces, the exchange of intelligence, and the provision of exercises and training missions. So anyway, we see that this is some kind of model when Ukraine will be a part of NATO, but probably not legally recognized as a part of NATO. Ukraine will have its own paragraph, some similar to paragraph 5 of NATO agreement, and if war starts between Russia and Ukraine once again, the Western countries will be forced to involve and to start fighting with the Russian Federation. And the Russians for this have their own answer, have their own probably opinion. For example, we have statements that, for example, several Russian politicals stated that if suddenly, God forbid, foreign missiles attack are launched deep into Russian territory, the response might be not with the rationing, but with the tactical nuclear weapons, or if some EU country attacks Russia, then the response will be nuclear. Furthermore, we have report that yesterday Putin came to the city by the name of Sarov, very important city. This is the moment when Putin arrived in this area. Vladimir Putin arrived in Sarov, where the Russian Federation Nuclear Center and the All-Russian Research Institute of Experimental Physics are located. The president was met at the steps by First Deputy Prime Minister Denis Manturov, Chief of the General Staff Valery Gerasimov, this is very important, and the head of Rosatom Alexander Likhachov. The First Deputy Head of the Presidential Administration Sergei Kriyenko and the Governor of the Nizhny Novgorod. So this meeting was highly represented by the Russian authorities, and the Chief of General Staff probably is a very interesting person at this meeting. So the Russians, by all these signals, are trying to tell the Western countries that if you go in wrong direction, the Russians may start using nuclear weapons in probably even this year. So we see that the situation continue escalating. We see that there is no resolution for this conflict in coming days. Anyway, let's wait and see what is going to be next. But obviously, this autumn, the coming autumn and winter of 2025 are going to be very, very hot. Now let's discuss the situation on the ground. We have a lot of very interesting changes. And first let's talk about the Zaporozhye direction. According to information we have, the Russians were slowed down by Ukrainians. So I would like to remind you that during the previous days, the Russians launched full-scale and probably major offensive operation in the Zaporozhye direction with the purpose to take as many as possible villages on the way towards the road R85 and then to cut two cities of Pokrovsk and Gulay-Polye in two different areas and then to handle with every single area separately. But suddenly the Ukrainians launched their own counter-offensive operation in the western part of the Donetsk region. And as a result of clashes during the previous days of counter-offensive operation, during 4 days of counter-attacks, Ukrainians managed to restore control over a significant number of territories. And this counter-attack ruined Russia's plans, and they were forced to stop their Zaporozhye offensive. Now, according to information we have, the Russians began regrouping and bringing additional forces, reinforcements, and reserves in this part of the Donetsk region with the purpose to stabilize the situation and to force the Ukrainians to fall back. The Russians are losing time, obviously. They all these days, all these hours, they should have used for offensive operation in the Zaporozhye direction, but now we see that the Russians are forced to stop and probably to change their plans for the autumn of 2025. Several mappers during the previous night additionally confirmed Ukraine counterattack and the results of those counteroffensive operations. Furthermore, according to information we have, the Ukrainians counterattack not just in the Zaporozhye direction. Currently, the Ukrainians are trying to counterattack also in the Dnipro direction. There are very heavy clashes for the area around the vicinity, around the village by the name of Goryokhova. The Ukrainians during the previous 24 hours restored control over the territory, and we have video where we can see how Ukrainians soldiers were storming these tree lines and fortifications along these tree lines. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Pokrovsk agglomeration. Currently, there are very heavy clashes for this territory. The sources reported that during the previous nights, the Russians attacked the city of Dobropolye with Geran drones. About 9 p.m., Russian Geran 2 attacks struck administrative facilities in the central part of the city of Dobropolye. The target of the attack was the building of the local police department. So this is not the only police department that was attacked by the Russians. According to information we have, the Russians attacked the police department in the city of Dobropolye, in the city of Konstantinovka, and in the city of Kramatorsk. So, telling the truth, during the previous 24 hours, probably a record number of strikes with FABs, with missiles, was recorded in this triangle, Dobropolye, Kramatorsk, and Konstantinovka. It seems that the Russians are entering the final part of their offensive operation with the purpose not, of course, to seize control over this territory, but to take the initiative completely in their hands and to break the situation in their favor. As for the situation on the ground, the sources are saying that currently there are very heavy clashes for the settlement of Rodinska. For example, neutral mappers reported that the Ukrainian army managed to expel Russian forces from the locality of Rodinska towards the cemetery of Rodinka mine. So neutral mappers are saying that as a result of counter-offensive operation, the Russians were forced to fall back from the area of Rodinska towards the mine by the name of Krasnolimanska and Rodinska. But at the same time, several pro-Russian sources are saying completely opposite thing. Russian fighters have consolidated their positions in the north and east of Rodinska. Fighting is underway for the western outskirts of Krasnoliman. The Russians are saying, as you can see, completely different story. They're saying that the Russians managed to enter deeper inside of the city of Rodinska and to improve their position significantly. When summarizing everything, both sides, neutral, pro-Ukrainian and pro-Russian, we see that most likely the northern and the eastern part of the village of the city of Rodinska is a gray zone. It's like combo kill zone, more precisely, where both the Russians and the Ukrainians suffer huge losses, when both the Russians and the Ukrainians are sending one wave after another wave of troopers with the purpose to improve their positions and to either to restore complete control of the city, it's for Ukrainian side, or to take the city of Rodinska under complete control, we are talking when by the Russian side. So the situation is very difficult because both the Russians and the Ukrainians understand the value of the city, because who controls Rodinska basically controls the entire Pokrovsk agglomeration. At the same time, several pro-Russian resources made very interesting statements from the eastern and the southeastern part of the Pokrovsk agglomeration. This direction was pretty calm since the beginning of Russian breakthrough. We haven't received almost anything from this area until at least this morning. During the previous nights, several pro-Russian resources made additional changes on the ground, telling us that the armored forces of the Russian Federation began their offensive operation in the southeastern part of the Pokrovsk agglomeration, and as a result of clashes during the previous 12 hours, the Russians managed to improve their position significantly. And the most important is that the Russians took under control several very powerful strongholds in this area, and several strongholds under control of the armored forces of Ukraine were caught in cauldron. So currently, as you can see, there are lots of pockets that were created by Russian offensive operation. We believe that these days the Russians will continue this offensive operation with the purpose to establish complete control over everything along this red line. We're talking about this dense network of the fortifications fortifications, about these dozens of strongholds, and the villages of Kazatskaya, Promen, and Balagan. The Russians will try to do everything they can, but to take these territories, this will allow the Russians to get as close as possible to the cities of Mirnograd, to its northern part and the southern part from the east. And then the Russians most likely will try to answer the city of Mirnograd itself. Most likely the Russians came to this operation because they realized that it can take maybe even months before they are able to move further in the northwestern direction towards the city of Dobropolye. So that is why the Russians decided to intensify their offensive in the southeastern part, because the autumn and winter are coming. So that is why it's better to have roof, to have basement, and to have some positions inside of this agglomeration where the Russians will be able to concentrate forces before moving further. So the final, or the most important stage of the storm assault operation of the Pokrovsk agglomeration has begun. Now let's move to the city of Konstantinovka. There are very heavy clashes, and as I told you, during the previous 12 hours, the biggest number, a record number of strikes was recorded. Fiery hail in the Kramatorsk, 40 strikes on Ukrainian targets. 30 explosions in 72 minutes thundered in Kramatorsk, the city consul first reported. Now, local resources report that about 40 bomb strikes have already been carried out. So the Russians are bombing and attacking, trying basically reduce the entire Slaviansk, Kramatorsk, Konstantinovka, Pokrovsk agglomeration to ruins. Dozens of bombs were being used by the Russians, and we have some geolocations that confirm the use of significant number of bombs in the area of the city of Konstantinovka and Kramatorsk. Lots of explosions, and we understand that this is already a final stage of Russian offensive. The stage when the Russians are not going to say the complete control over the territory, but the stage when the Russians are trying to take the initiative completely in their hand, and after this stage, the Ukrainians will only retreat and retreat and retreat, and their retreat is going to be faster and faster and faster. So that is why the Russians increasing their firepower with all types, all means they have. During the previous 24 hours, nothing special was recorded in this area, just artillery strikes, no changes on the ground, but as we know, currently there are very heavy clashes. The only changes are recorded to the northwest of the city of Chasov-Yar. Here we might see how Ukrainians were attacking Russian troopers along this dense network of the fortifications, which confirms Russian control over the territory. We see that the Russians are trying to advance in the direction of Drushkovka along the railways, also from the northwestern part of the city of Chasov-Yar. So once again, today I would like to remind you that yesterday was a day of Russian national flag. Today is the day of Ukrainian national flag, so that is why we expect very interesting updates today. And tomorrow is the Independence Day of Ukraine. So maybe this is the reason why the president of the Russian Federation today decided to visit the, let's say, nuclear center of the Russian Federation. Maybe these days, today or tomorrow, the Russian Federation will test new weapons to show the Western countries and to show Ukraine that most likely there is no sense to continue the special military operation, and that it's time to start real negotiation process on the Russian terms. And that's it for the short video. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching, subscribe to my channel, put your likes on my Patreon, and have a good day.